Can you just start off by explaining how the no-knead method works?
Well, the no-knead method works according to, I really do believe it was the way in which all bread was made before the Industrial Revolution, with the one exception that in this case, in this method that I'm putting forth in the book, we're using commercial yeast, which is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. But I think the way of making bread where people would just add flour, water, and some leavening together, not really need it, but just compose the dough and then allow it to sit and rot, basically, until through that fermentation, that rotting, the dough is transformed as a result of the proteins denaturing and realigning as a result of the presence of water, and also as a result of what's called the shear force of the gassing effect of the yeast.
Well,
And
rotting is a word that probably people don't want to hear, but that's
Well,
what
but-
the
but-
process is.
but bread
you
baking-
use less yeast than other breads use.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of like, you're basically playing like a scientist at home. You're taking flour and water, these two very kind of, what we would consider, or wheat and water, very elemental, seemingly elemental things. One is one of the most abundant chemicals on the planet, or the most abundant chemical. And then the other thing is a grain that has this insanely long history with us human beings, and complex history as well. And then you're basically just allowing it to rot, or I mean, you're introducing a fungus, and the fungus over a period of times, and it's like cheese making, except you're not eating. You're eating a cooked product instead.
But you use less yeast because you're letting it go so long? Because when you knead bread, you can get the whole thing into the oven within a couple of hours.
Oh, yeah, you can make.
But this recipe requires 12 to 18 hours. You just let the mix sit and bubble for quite a long time.
Yeah, and actually, the window, when you use a very small quantity of yeast, you also increase that window. That period of time when it's ideal to turn it into a loaf of bread. So you might mix the dough at 6 p.m. in the evening and then forget to do something in the daytime and leave it out in your kitchen and get home at 6 o'clock and find that it's quite suitable for bread making, in part because it's an individual loaf of bread. It's not a huge batch. So that little blob of dough has very little ability to kind of insulate itself, and as a result, the fermentation proceeds very gradually and very, very slowly. Yeasts don't have legs.
Can you do this commercially? Do you do this at the Sullivan Street Bakery?
I had been utilizing, do utilize a no-knead method for some of my breads at the bakery, and I do a lot of what I call, low knead, meaning try to really minimize the amount of mechanical working to the dough, because the more you agitate the dough, the more oxygen you introduce to the dough, the more blanched or bleached the color of the bread. At the same time, while I'm saying this, kneading does and can improve fermentation, because yeasts, for their metabolism, while they can also be anaerobic, do enjoy oxygen.
Mm-hmm. So their kneading is
When
another method.
When I say yeast enjoyment, I don't mean like how they're singing about having. But you're saying what?
So you're not ruling out kneading, but we don't have to do it. How long has?
I think this process has been around since the discovery of either like an emmer wheat or a spelt, or when bread making was discovered sometime about 6,000 years ago on the southern, or at the beginning of the Nile River in Ethiopia. This is all conjecture at this point. It was probably something people were grinding grains already, and they just observed this process occurring naturally with natural fermentation, not with that single strain yeast that we use called Saccharomyces.
And were people continuing to do it all along, or had this been largely forgotten until fairly recently?
I think that what ended up happening is that technology, a very, very critical period in human history, was the end of the century preceding the one that just ended, where it was almost like a tsunami of positivism, which changed like our thinking. The invention of the steam combine, all of a sudden you needed from 17 people to cultivate, sow, harvest, and winnow 1 acre of grain and wheat. All of a sudden you have one person who can do 2,000 acres or 200 acres. I forget exactly the number. And that caused all these country folk to migrate en masse to the urban centers, which necessitated mass manufacturing bread, just because bread's function it took precedent over like any sort of aesthetic interest in it or any sense of quality. I think that bread for a very, very long time, and at least the culture that I was raised in, it's really more of a culture of convenience, not quality.